All right, so hopefully you got a good break in. Hopefully you went out and maybe did that Google Forms about needs versus wants, got a good grade, and we'll kind of see. But now we're on to section 1.2, finishing up section 1 of our class. And this is kind of moving on to a grander scheme of things, talking about economics as a whole, rather than just focusing on how a business operates. So just like our last section, we have objectives. So by the end of this part of the lecture, you'll be able to explain the importance of economics. We'll describe the 4 economic systems, and then we'll kind of discuss the impact of market forces. And market forces will be the last thing we talk about on this lecture. So to begin with, we can't start talking about economics until we know what economics is. So economics is a science that examines how goods and services are produced, sold, and used. And that's really what economics is. It's a science, okay? People have got this a whole job examining goods and services, looking at how they're produced, looking at how they're sold, and looking at how customers, once they buy those products, use them. So this bullet point right here, it's on this slide, but it's going to have a lot to do with what we talk about on a few later slides. But know that all economic resources are limited and that needs and wants are unlimited. And then kind of save that, and we'll come back to it a little bit later. The factors of production, a key vocab word here, because it basically is all the economic resources that a nation has and then takes and uses to make goods and supply services for its population. Okay, and factors of production are going to differ from country to country, so it's important to keep that in mind. So our 4 factors of production, which we're going to define on the next slide, are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So let's look at those right now. Land is exactly that. Okay, it's all of our natural resources that we have within our nation. It's the raw materials found in nature, water, all of our minerals and ores that we get from mining, trees. Everything that occurs naturally within our nation is considered a land factor of production. Next, we have labor, which comes down to you and me, people working. Okay, work performed by people within organization, or otherwise called human resources, are going to be the labor factor of production. All of those workers that work in factories, everyone who goes out and has a 9-to-5 job is considered labor. Okay. Next, we have capital. Okay, and capital are basically the tools, equipment, any machinery that's used to produce goods or provide services. Okay, so things that get the job done, basically. So when we talk about capital goods, these are going to be goods. Okay, so products that are bought by businesses and then used to produce that business's final products for consumers. So a good example of this is like a hammer. A hammer is still a product, correct? But when a business buys a hammer and then makes something with it, it's used as a capital good in order to produce another product that a consumer is going to buy. So that's capital factor of production. And then lastly, we have entrepreneurship, which comes down to human beings and the willingness that human beings have to start a new business. Now, you can't just go out and start a new business without having at least some prior knowledge to it and without having the ability to, okay? Especially if you're trying to get into a business that maybe has a hard point of entry, okay? So they need to have the willingness, but they also need to have the ability to start a new business as well. And any human being who decides to start a new business, we like to call entrepreneurs, okay? So there's your vocab words referring to the factors of production. All right, we have the 4 factors of production, and I promise you this will come up later on a worksheet or a test: land, labor, capital, and then finally entrepreneurship. All right, so remember that second bullet point on maybe that first slide that I said where we have limited resources, but all of our consumers have unlimited wants and needs? Well, that brings us here to our economic problem. We have unlimited wants, but our nation cannot fill those with the limited resources they have, okay? Which creates a problem scarcity. That develops when the demand or when consumers' wants is higher than the available resources that a nation has. So with scarcity come two different things, a trade-off and an opportunity cost. So a trade-off is when something is given up in order to gain something else. And an opportunity cost is the value of that next best option that was not selected. Now you may be saying, well, that's super confusing, Mr. Jennings. Well, let me break it down in a fairly easy example for you. Let's say you are in school and you have a test tomorrow. Now, you want to get a good grade on this test, and you have two options. You can either stay up really late studying for this test to ensure you get a good grade, or you can go to bed and get a good night's sleep and hope that you're prepared enough, okay? So let's talk about the trade-off of that. If you stay up super duper late to study for that test, what's your trade-off? What's something that you're giving up in order to stay up super late? Well, a good night's sleep. So now you're staying up super late to study, but when you wake up in the morning, you might be super tired, okay? Now, the opportunity cost is the next best option. So what was your other option there? You had the option to either stay up super late to study, or you had the option to go to bed. So that's where the opportunity cost comes in. You're trading something off, and then the opportunity cost is the value of that next best option. Now, value is going to be relative to each person, okay? Basically meaning that it's going to be different for me than it is to you. I might value a good night's sleep more than I value staying up super late to study. But you might not value a good night's sleep. You might say, I can run on 4 hours of sleep. So it's going to be relative person to person. So here is an image of what our economic problem is as an economy. We have limited resources over here. We combine that with unlimited needs and wants from our consumers, and we're forced into a problem of scarcity. So our individuals, our businesses, and our governments within our economy need to make some choices. And that takes us into the systematic decision-making process, which is basically just a process of choosing an option by looking at all of the available information and weighing your costs and your benefits. So basically your pros and cons of the alternatives along with the option, okay? So we can go back to having a good night's sleep or studying for a test, all right? If you're making that decision, if you're trying to make that decision, you're gonna weigh your options, right? You're gonna say, well, I could go to sleep right now and get a good night's sleep, but then, man, maybe I want to get such a good grade on the test. Well, I could stay up super late, but then maybe I'm going to be really tired tomorrow and I'll fall asleep during my test. So that's the decision-making process. You kind of have to look at all of your different options, and then you yourself have to decide what's the best option for you. Now, that's a really easy decision in relation to the big decisions that governments and businesses are making that could cost millions of dollars. So just know that this decision-making process happens with big-time decisions as well as small-time decisions. All right, part of the objectives for this lecture are talking about economic systems. And an economic system is an organized way in which a nation, so a specific nation, a country, chooses to use its resources to create goods and services. And we're going to talk about 4 different types of economic systems, okay? Because the economic systems are going to decide how those nations answer these 3 economic questions that come with scarcity. Okay, and these 3 questions are: what should we produce? How should we produce it? And then for whom should we produce it? Okay, those are the 3 economic questions that nations are dealing with, and their economic systems help them decide how to answer those questions. So the first one is going to be a traditional economy. This is going to be an economy where decisions are based on the society's values or their culture or their customs. So if we're looking at kind of how these nations are going to be making their decisions, it's generally these large rural populations or tribal countries or tribal societies that rely on farming and hunting and gathering, all of those different activities in order to meet the needs of their society. So there's little or no manufacturing, basically meaning that there's nothing made in factories or plants. And people are going to barter for their goods or services rather than paying for them in money. Okay, so there's no dollar bills in these societies. A lot of times this is based on, oh, that's the way things have always been, or it's based on religion, something like that. And that's a traditional economy. In contrast to that, we have command economies, which is where the government is going to make all of the economic decisions for its citizens. So this is often referred to as a centrally planned economy, and it's found in a lot of communist or socialist societies, which can sound scary, and well, it can be, because the government is going to own and control all of those factors of production that we talked about earlier. They're going to decide the quantity of the production for the products that they want to make, and then they're going to set the prices. So individuals like you and me, the consumers, aren't going to have any control over that stuff. So we might be forced to spend $10 on a gallon of milk, but if that's what the government decides, that's what the government decides. And that's in a command economy. On the contrast to command economies, we're presented with a market economy. And a market economy is where individuals are free to make their own economic decisions. And this is often called free enterprise or private enterprise. And it oftentimes brings along with it capitalism, which is going to be an economic system where the resources, our factors of production, are going to be privately owned by individuals like you and me, and the government isn't going to have anything to do with them. Okay, so in a true capitalist society, the government has no regulation over our economic resources. Now, that's not quite what we have in America, but let's take a look at the free enterprise system here. Okay, we have competition, we have voluntary exchange, we have private property, we have profit, and we have an economic freedom within a free enterprise system. Now, when we move on to a more local example of the U.S., okay, we're looking at a more mixed economy where the government and individuals both make decisions about economic resources, okay? And the level of government involvement is going to vary between nation to nation and even vary over time. If we look at the United States from 1776 all the way up until 2020, the level of government involvement has gone up and down several times throughout our history. And that just comes with a mixed economy and kind of who's making the decisions. All right, so the last objective I said we were going to conquer today is talking about these market forces and their impact on economy. So market forces are basically economic factors that affect price, demand, and availability of a good or a service. So they include supply and demand, they include a profit motive, and they include competition. The first thing we're going to talk about is supply and demand. So the law of supply and demand can get a little bit complicated. And I'm going to be honest with you, I took economics in college, and there are college students that don't understand the law of supply and demand. So I'm going to try and explain it to you simply. And if you don't understand it still, please, please, please ask me questions about it after you're done watching this lecture. So the price of a product is determined by the relationship of the supply, how much of the product there is, and the demand, how much consumers want it for that product. So it's the relationship between the two. Now, when we look at market price, that's determined at a point on the graph of supply and demand where supply and demand are equal for that product. And we like to call that equilibrium. So if we look at the law of supply and demand here in picture form, you can see that when supply, so the quantity of goods supplied, equals the demand for that good, that's set the market price or equilibrium. Okay, now oftentimes that's not going to be that's ideal, but that's not where businesses are going to, that's not where the supply and demand is going to end up, because businesses and consumers are going to want two different things. And we see that on this next slide here. So supply curve is all about producers, okay? They're going to want to supply products at a greater quantity when the price is higher. And that makes sense, right? Let's say that you go out and you start a cupcake business and you find out that you can charge $20 for a cupcake. You're going to want to supply as many cupcakes as you possibly can, right? Because every time you sell a cupcake, you're making $20. So once that price starts creeping up, producers are going to want to supply more and more of that good. Now, that's not always good because consumers are going to buy fewer goods at higher prices. So if you start charging $20 for a cupcake, consumers might say, man, that's an expensive cupcake. I'll just go buy my cupcake somewhere else. And that's where the supply and demand curves kind of have to meet, okay, to where the demand and the supply are kind of the same. So when we have two different kind of things here when consumers are demanding for products. When the consumer demand for a product is greater than that of the supply of the product, we're presented with a shortage, okay? And a good example I always like to use is like the Nintendo Switch, okay? When Nintendo came out with the Switch, they only produced a finite amount of Nintendo Switches. They sent all of that out, but there was a huge demand for Nintendo Switches. Everyone wanted one. They're fun. I have one myself. So the demand for them was greater than what Nintendo supplied, and therefore there was a shortage, okay? Now that's good for Nintendo because they know, well, we still have people that want a Nintendo Switch, so we can still produce this and we can still sell it at the same price, okay? On the flip side of that, when consumers say, you know what, I don't really want any of this product anymore, I'm good, I'm just not interested that much in this product, and the consumer demand is less than that of what producers are supplying, there's going to be a surplus, okay? The producers are going to have excess of their product in stores, sitting on shelves, not selling, or in their warehouse, not being shipped anywhere because no store wants to carry their product anymore. So that's the difference in how supply and demand affect the market and what people want to buy and how they want to buy it. All right, our last two market forces are going to be that of a profit motive, which is going to be one reason why people choose to start and expand businesses, okay? And we talked about profit in the first lecture video and how it's the difference between income and expenses. And this is the one true driving force of why someone would create a business, okay? Now, once businesses are created, we're put into probably the most important market force, and that's competition. It's basically what controls our economy, okay? And competition is basically just the action taken by two or more businesses when they're attempting to attract the same customer. And it regulates prices, it regulates advertising, it regulates what stays in business. So you think about competition like Burger King and McDonald's, things like that where, okay, well, McDonald's came out with a $1 menu hamburger. So in order to get customers who want to eat burgers at Burger King also came out with a $1 burger. That regulates the prices. It's that competition that keeps businesses kind of in line with each other because they're both competing for the same customers. So competition is important because you and I, when we go out to buy something, we're free to choose to buy whatever goods and services we want. So a lot of times people make decisions on what's cheaper. If I go to the store and I see that this brand of granola bars is cheaper than this brand of granola bars, I might decide to buy the cheaper brand of granola bars. And that's where competition comes into play with consumers. All right, that does it for our section 1 notes. This is the last lecture you're going to have to watch. Now, there is that needs versus want Google form out on the classroom for you to complete. And there's also a PDF file of section 1.1 vocabulary. It's some completion questions, it is some multiple choice questions, it is some matching questions that I want you guys to finish to cover a review of vocabulary about section 1. Once you get all of that stuff done, you guys are done for the week and you are officially done with section 1. And then next week, we will get to move on to doing something fun with opportunity cost and moving on to section 2 and talking about government involvement within our economy. But that is it for this lecture, and I hope you guys have a good day and a good weekend.